In the modern world, a cheating scandal might end in a breakup or a viral post, but 10,000 years ago, it was often a matter of life and death. For ancient tribes, betrayal wasn't just a broken heart, it was a threat to the entire group's survival. And the punishments? They make modern ghosting look like a walk in the park. The thing most people get wrong about ancient justice is that it was chaotic. They assume early humans lived in some kind of lawless free-for-all, ruled by whoever had the biggest rock. But that's almost exactly backwards. The archaeological and anthropological record shows something far more sophisticated. Ancient communities had intricate, deeply enforced social codes, and when those codes were broken, the response was swift, collective, and often permanent. Cheating, in its broadest sense, meant any betrayal of the group's trust. That included sexual infidelity, yes, but also hoarding food, lying about a hunt, stealing from a neighbor, or defecting to a rival band. All of it fell under the same moral category. You put yourself above the group, and in a world where collective survival was the only survival, that was among the worst things a person could do. The most detailed picture we have of how pre-state societies actually handled this comes from anthropologist Christopher Boehm, who spent decades compiling data from 48 hunter-gatherer societies across 6 continents. His 2012 book, Moral Origins, draws on records from missionaries, colonial officials, and ethnographers who documented these cultures before contact disrupted them. What Boehm found is that hunter-gatherer groups had consistent, recognizable mechanisms for punishing norm violators, and they were not gentle about it. The first response to cheating was almost always social: gossip. The group would talk, loudly and deliberately, within earshot of the offender. This wasn't just venting, it was a precision tool. Gossip in small band societies served as what Boehm calls public defamation, broadcasting the offender's behavior to every member of the group simultaneously. The message was clear: we all know what you did, and we are all watching you now. If gossip didn't work, ridicule was next. Public mockery in hunter-gatherer communities was a serious sanction, arguably more feared than physical punishment, because it attacked social standing directly. Among the Inuit of the Canadian Arctic, a form of ritualized song duel called a drum match allowed 2 parties in a dispute to publicly humiliate each other in front of the whole community. The crowd decided the winner, not by who made the better legal argument, but by who got the bigger laugh. Losing a drum match was a reputational wound that could take years to heal. Among the Kungsan of the Kalahari, one of the most studied hunter-gatherer groups on Earth, anthropologist Richard Lee documented in 1979 how the community handled a man named Twee who had killed 3 people. Rather than one authority figure pronouncing judgment, every adult member of the band, including women and elderly members, surrounded him and shot him with poisoned arrows simultaneously. The collective act was deliberate. It meant no single person could be accused of the killing. The community as a whole had acted, and the community as a whole bore the responsibility. This wasn't mob violence. It was the earliest form of due process. Each arrow in that circle landed the same way a verdict lands in a courtroom, quietly, with the full weight of consensus behind it. If this kind of buried history is landing for you, mark it with a like before we go further. It tells the story the same way those arrows did, all at once, everyone together. Sexual cheating specifically, infidelity within a pair bond, carried its own category of consequences, and the archaeological evidence for how ancient humans responded to it goes back further than most people expect. A 2003 study published in Human Nature by anthropologist Laura Betzig analyzed cross-cultural records from 186 societies and found that male sexual jealousy was the leading cause of documented violence in pre-state communities across every region studied. But the violence was rarely random. It followed clear, predictable patterns, directed at the rival or the unfaithful partner or both, and it was almost always preceded by a public accusation and a form of community adjudication. In many Amazonian societies, including the Yanomami, whose social structure has been studied extensively since Napoleon Chagnon's fieldwork in the 1960s, a man who cheated faced a formal chest-pounding duel. His accuser had the right to strike him in the chest, full force, as many times as agreed in advance, usually 3 or 4, and then the roles reversed. Clubs were sometimes used instead of fists. These weren't brawls. They had strict rules, designated witnesses, and a clear endpoint. Whoever absorbed the blows without flinching or retaliating outside the agreed structure was considered vindicated. It was adversarial, physical, and entirely public. What's striking about all of these mechanisms, the gossip, the ridicule, the collective punishment, the formalized duel, is how much they resemble what came later: The public shaming function of gossip reappears in the Athenian practice of ostracism, where citizens voted to exile anyone whose power or behavior threatened the community. The chest-pounding duel echoes in medieval trial by combat. The Kung collective execution prefigures jury verdicts. Ancient humans weren't waiting for civilization to invent justice. They were already doing it. The most severe punishment, across virtually every hunter-gatherer culture documented, was ostracism, being cast out of the group. And this is where the life and death stakes of ancient social codes become literal rather than metaphorical. In environments like the Pleistocene savanna, the Siberian steppe, or the Kalahari desert, a lone human being expelled from their band had a survival horizon measured in days, not years. There were no solo exceptions. There was no wilderness cabin where a disgraced person could start over alone. Banishment was, in practical terms, a death sentence executed by the environment instead of by human hands. Boehm documents cases from multiple continents where repeat cheaters, those who stole repeatedly, lied repeatedly, or violated sexual norms after prior warnings, were expelled without exception. Among the Mbuti forest foragers of the Democratic Republic of Congo, studied extensively by Colin Turnbull in the 1960s, a man who repeatedly stole meat from other families' portions was given 3 warnings by the group's elder council. On the 4th offense, every family in the band dismantled their huts and rebuilt them a significant distance away, leaving the offender literally alone in the original camp. They didn't banish him, they simply moved, collectively and silently, and left him behind. If you want to keep coming back to stories like this, where the deep past turns out to be stranger and more human than expected, the subscribe button is how you make sure the next one finds you. The picture that emerges from all of this research isn't one of brutality, it's one of proportionality. Ancient communities generally preferred social pressure over physical violence. They escalated gradually: gossip, then ridicule, then formal sanction, then ostracism, then, as a last resort, execution. And the escalation was collective. No single person held the power to punish. The group moved together, or not at all. That design feature, the distribution of punitive power across the whole community, was itself a safeguard against abuse. The person who tried to use social punishment as a personal weapon quickly found that the group's consensus could turn on them just as easily. There's one more detail worth sitting with. The Sungir burial site in Russia, dated to around 34,000 years ago, contains the grave of a man buried with extraordinary care, red ochre covering his body, thousands of ivory beads sewn into his clothing, fox-tooth pendants, a carved ivory pendant at his throat. He had a healed femur fracture, which means the group had kept him alive through a serious injury, fed him, protected him, waited for him to heal. The same community capable of executing a persistent cheater with poisoned arrows was also capable of nursing an injured man back to health across months of immobility. Both responses came from the same logic. The group's survival depended on cooperation. Threats to cooperation were handled with force. Contributions to cooperation were rewarded with care. Modern courts, modern HR departments, modern social media pylons, they are all, in some structural sense, the same mechanism the Kumsan were running on the Kalahari. The technology changes. The underlying logic doesn't. We are still, tens of thousands of years later, the animal that punishes cheaters together. That's the end. But also kind of the beginning. The next video picks up exactly where your curiosity is right now. It's one click away. You already know what to do.